Today I'm going to be talking about oral language development and second language acquisition. This is actually the content for week 6. And in addition to talking about oral language, we will also spend some time thinking about why we need to integrate the 4 language skills. So, as I said, it is very important for you as an ESL teacher or a teacher of English learners to move away from a discrete skills perspective. Now, by this I mean that teachers, for example, will focus on developing their English learners' listening skills versus their writing skills. Or they may focus on their speaking skills instead of their writing skills. So whenever you're working with English learners, you need to remember that they will need to have these 4 language skills to be able to be proficient in the language. Now, you also need to remember that language can be used for many different things. At the very basic level, we can say that we use language to communicate, to be understood, to be listened to. Now, one of the very important uses of language is to learn. So, whenever we're dealing with English learners in our classrooms, we're trying to develop this language of schooling, meaning we're trying to help them be able to listen to us whenever we're teaching. We want them to be able to understand what it is that they're reading. We want them to be able to communicate and, for example, respond to your questions in class. And we also want them to be able to write about what you're teaching. So, it is very important too to mention that within these 4 language skills, we can actually classify these into 2 big categories. One of them would be considered the receptive skills, and these would be listening and reading. And as you may recall, we've talked about comprehensible input. So basically what they listen and what they read would be things that they need to be able to comprehend. Now, productive skills, on the other hand, are things that they will be producing. So, for example, sharing an anecdote during circle time or speaking about something that happened and being able to write would be classified as productive skills. Now, why do we need to focus on oral language? As I already said, English learners need opportunities for not only comprehensible input, and you may recall crashing, but they also need opportunities for comprehensible output, and you may recall swaying, that we've already talked about both of them in class. So again, they need to be able to understand what it is that you're saying. They need to be able to process that information, but it's not just about processing or acquiring information, it's also about being able to produce. Another thing that you have to remember is we need to help our learners develop not just the BICS or the basic interpersonal communication skills that we often refer to as the social language, but we also need them to be able to develop the academic language, the language of the content areas, or the CALP, which would be the cognitive academic language proficiency. So really our goal as teachers is to help them maintain their BICS, right? So they can actually converse and talk to friends and talk to their parents. But we also need to be able to develop this academic language, this academic understanding for them to achieve academically in the classroom. So ultimately, your job as a teacher is to create these scaffolds that are necessary for English learners to achieve this language fluency in all the 4 language skills that we've talked about. To integrate these 4 language skills we've already talked about, we need to really pay attention to the ways in which language is being used. If you see your textbook on page 121, you will see that we have Halliday's Language Functions Framework, or taxonomy. What this just tells us is that our learners will be using language for different purposes. Take, for example, instrumental. Instrumental is the kind of language that we will use to express our needs. So our students will say things such as, I want to eat, I am hungry, I need to go to the restroom. With regulatory, we're basically telling others what it is that we want them to do. So you would often hear your students say things go away, come here, don't come back, etc. With interactional, we basically try to form relationships with others. We want to be social. So we would say, I want to be your friend, let's go play, etc. We are basically using language again to develop a relationship with someone else. For personal, we're trying to express our opinions and feelings. So a learner might say, I don't like eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, or I don't like when you pull my hair, etc. With heuristic, we are trying to figure out how to use language to gain knowledge about what is around us and the environment. So they might ask things like, why is it cold? Why is it raining? With imaginative and divertive, we're basically trying to use our creative self to tell stories, to tell jokes. Basically, we're using language in imaginative ways. And finally, informative, we are using language to inform and share information or exchange knowledge with others. You also need to remember that there's a continuum of oral language development. So some of your beginners will probably be using a lot of the instrumental and regulatory functions at the beginning. And those learners who are at a more advanced stage will probably be using more of the heuristic and imaginative type of language. You also need to think about what kinds of language are more social and academic in nature. Is instrumental language, or the language that we use for instrumental purposes, more social than academic? We could even say the first four are more social or used in more social interactions versus the last four, which are used in a more academic or decontextualized setting. You can use anecdotal records, you can actually use checklists, you can use rubrics. If you actually click on the actual PowerPoint, you will see that this link that I have on the rubrics will take you to Ruby Star. And one other way of assessing your student's oral language is by using the Student Oral Language Observation Matrix. And you can go to page 138 on your textbook. SOLAM, or the Student Oral Language Observation Matrix, it's a rating scale that it's pretty much used to assess your student's command of oral language in a variety of context situations. So for example, if they're working in groups, if they're giving a presentation, a poster presentation, if they're talking in the playground, etc. This matrix has 5 domains or areas. So the first one is comprehension. That will be the column that you have on your far left. You have comprehension, you have fluency, you have vocabulary, you have pronunciation, and you have your grammar. Now, each one of these domains or areas are on a 5-point scale. So you'll see, from 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest and the highest being 5. And so an example of comprehension would be, that the child cannot understand even a simple conversation. Say you're talking to them and they just look at you without even responding. You do have to remember, though, that they may be in the silent stage, so they may not be at that point ready yet to converse with you. A score of 3 is where the learner would probably understand most of what it is being said, usually at a slower the normal speed with some repetitions. And 5 would be, the child basically understands everything that is being said during classroom discussions and tasks. So for a learner to be considered proficient, they have to score 19 to 20 points, and 25 is really considered proficient. Some schools do use the SOLAM observation matrix, and you can actually modify this tool as well, or the rating scale as well. Now, what are some of the strategies that you can actually use for oral language development? Some of the most, I would say, basic ones are things that we often use already in the classroom. We've talked about the buddy system, and this just means that you would pair your English learner with someone else. You can pair them with a bilingual buddy or somebody who speaks the child's native language. You can pair them up with a native English speaker. But whoever your English learner is being partnered with, you will need to make a decision as to why it is that you are partnering them with that person. You also have to be consistent, and that's very important. So if, for example, the child has a buddy for math, well, you will need to also have a buddy for other areas. Also remember that the buddy system, you have to make sure that both children are benefiting from the experience. So it's not just the English learner who is learning from the English learner, but the English learner should be learning something also from the buddy. Pair work with or without a buddy is also very important, and so is group work. You also need to create opportunities for nonverbal language. So these would be things that you would, for example, if you're giving a lesson, that you have to build in opportunities for them to use their language in nonverbal ways. So it would be, an example of it would be, for example, if they were to draw instead of just talk. Remember about modeling and not correcting. Using visual support is also very important. Having a variety of graphic organizers that they might use, such as a Venn diagram, is very important. Just remember to be consistent with their use. Using real and concrete objects is also very important. Having games in the classroom, using songs and chants, and I'll be sharing some of these things in class. And having a lot of show and tell activities. Also remember that you will most likely need to repeat some of your instructions, especially if you have English learners who are just starting. You will also need to use a lot of nonverbal language yourself. And basically you have to create scaffolds across your teaching, not just for one area or the other, and not just for one language skill, but for all of them.